My name is Chris Riedel. I'm a program manager with IT services here at the university. I'm in the emerging technologies group, and I've got with me the group of panelists that I'm going to introduce, and then I'm just give you a little overview of how this is going to go. I'll introduce these guys, and then we're going to have, I've got a few questions that I'm going to throw out, just general things that I think will be of interest, and then after about 20-30 minutes, we'll open it up, and you guys can ask the questions that you have. So I've got to my left Taylor Lease. Taylor is engineering manager at StackMob. He's currently the back-end engineering manager. StackMob is a small San Francisco-based startup that started building a platform as a service for mobile app developers. Before StackMob, he was at GoGo, where he launched in-flight internet for, I believe it was the first 5 commercial airlines. And then next to Taylor, we've got Raghu, who's an instructor and managing partner at the Starter League, which I think at least some of you might know what that is. So he's currently instructor there, and he spent 8 years prior to that successfully building and managing companies before realizing he lacked the skills he needed to build the kinds of solutions that he actually wanted. So he came back to school here at the University of Chicago, and ever since then I think has been trying to help other beginners figure out how to build the solutions that they need. And then next to Raghu, we've got Phil Dunham. He's engineering manager at Wize Commerce. He's been developing applications and managing software developers for over 15 years. He spent 7 years at Orbitz. All of these guys are graduates of the University of Chicago. So I think with that, we'll just get started. I think what I'll do is I'll throw out the first question to Taylor, which I think is the obvious one. Taylor, can you talk a little bit about what folks might expect from a technical interview and how that might be structured?
Sure. So I think when you think about the technical interview, you have to think of it from the perspective of like who are you actually interviewing with, because the type of technical interview you're going to get at a corporate job, at a government job, at a startup are all going to be very different. For example, you're going to go into a startup and people are going to get you on the whiteboard, start asking you questions about algorithms and data structures and Big O and things like that. You know, you're going to go to a corporate job and they're going to, they're going to ask you questions about culture and career growth. What are you interested in? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like sort of like scenario-based type stuff. And you get, I say the government interview is closer to the corporate interview. So you really need to be prepared for the scenario that you're going to be in and approach it from that perspective.
Raghu, do you have thoughts on that? I see you nodding your head a lot.
Oh, sure. No, it's so the startup in the technical interview from a startup that's like a 1-person or a 2-person company, and they're trying to hire you maybe as their CTO, and they don't know any technology at all, so they're not going to like quiz you on technical stuff on the whiteboard. So that's a completely different kind of interview from maybe joining an established startup or a big company where you're going to be working with other engineers who know what they're doing, and they're going to ask you very specific technical questions. It's just 2 totally different experiences. So should be prepared for one or the other accordingly.
So can Phil, maybe you can answer this. How might one go about being prepared and sort of preemptively knowing what that interview might be like?
Typically you're gonna talk to their recruiter, and hopefully they're gonna fill you in on who you're gonna be talking to. And when I go in for interviews, I try to make sure I know the names of whoever I'm gonna be talking to, and find out, look them up on LinkedIn and find out what they do, what they've been doing, so I know who it is I'm going to be talking to, what sort of experiences they've had, and what sort of perspective they're going to bring to it. I mean, you guys are totally right. I mean, like in a larger organization, they're more likely to have a formal process set up and and sort of a different set sort of questions and set sort of interviews that you're going to do. Whereas in a larger corporation, the people you interview with may not be the people that you wind up working with, because they have like a set number of people that are good interviewers, and they sort of vet everyone, and you might get slotted in some other department. Whereas a smaller company, you're more likely to be talking to all the people that you're going to be working with. So I mean, to prepare for a technical interview, just sort of you should be preparing for it your whole career. So you should know what they're going to ask you about your career. If there's a specific language that they're interested in hiring you to do, you might want to brush up on that a little bit, or do some, I had some technical interviews. When I first interviewed at Orbitz, I knew someone there, and I was able to grill them about what sort of questions to expect. So if you know someone in the organization who's gone through the same process, I would try to take advantage of that. I did, or they're really going to grill me about Java threads, which I'm a little fuzzy on. So I did do some cramming in that area, and that can pay off if you know exactly what you're going to expect. But, just find out as much as you can about who you're going to be talking to and the company, I would say.
I totally agree. Know who you're going to interview with. Also know the product.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to go to a small startup, they want to make sure that you're passionate about the product that you're building, because that's what's going to keep you up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, actually still working on it. Just make sure that your goals sort of align with the company. Like if you want to have more of like a work-life balance, startup's not for you, right? Like just know what you're getting into, and really like. If you know the product, you're passionate about it, you really seem interested, you show potential, like then if you're not perfect in the technical interview, the actual technical questions, maybe there's some forgiveness there.
So let's say you're being asked the technical questions and you don't know something. How would you deal with that?
So the first thing to do is not to give up on the question. Don't argue with the interviewer about that the question is a bad question, right? Do what you can to try to work through the question, ask questions. A lot of the time it doesn't really matter if you get the answer right. They just want to make sure that you have a rational thought process and that you're getting closer to the answer. And they're not just going to sit there and be quiet. They're going to help you along. They're going to give you hints, right? And so as long as you're working through the problem with you and they feel like there's a discussion, then I'd say that's probably a successful answer to the question.
Yeah, if it's just a factual question, do you know X or Y, and you don't know it, be honest. Because if you say you know something, you're going to get a follow-up question. You're going to be exposed, and you're definitely not going to get that job. And people may remember that. But more often the question than a factual question, you're going to get a problem-solving question, and they're really interested in seeing how you go about solving a problem and what your problem-solving skills are. Because that's what they're going to hire you to do. They're going to hire you to solve problems, not to know things. So, yes, don't be quiet, work through it, and talk out loud, and you will get some help.
Raghu, do you have thoughts on that?
I think the last bit is super important. Like, talk out loud, like externalize the thoughts that are going through your brain. That's what they want to hear. It's so, like if some people will just get stumped by a question, they'll stare at the board for a while. Maybe they'll figure out the answer or maybe they won't, but it's not helpful to the interviewer if they can't hear your thought process, because that's what they're interested in, not the answer so much.
Silence during an interview is not good. Yeah. That's not, and a sort of side point on that, if the people you're interviewing with, they're not professional interviewers. Often they would rather be doing something. They would rather be coding than talking to you. So they might not be especially good at interviewing, especially if there isn't a set process set up for how to do it at that organization. So another big piece of advice: ask questions. If there's a lull in the organization, ask questions. And the more you know about their product and what they do, the better. To Taylor's point, so. If you act like you're interested, or I would not just act, but be interested and ask questions about what they do and what sort of decisions they make, and that, fill in any quiet areas yourself if they're not doing that.
Yeah, come to the interview with questions.
Yes.
Almost every single person that you interview with, at the end, they're going to say, "Do you have any questions for me?" Have some questions.
Yeah.
Make it a conversation.
So related to that, and I think that this is probably true with any interview, but how important do you guys think it is to sort of get a read on who you're interviewing with?
I think it's really important. Like Phil mentioned, every time I go to an interview, I try to find somebody on LinkedIn, pretty much, Google them, try to find out as much as I can about them, find out where they went to school, where they worked, all that is just information that you have that you can start a conversation with. You can, make a connection with somebody about something that they did 3 years ago, then they'll remember you, right? So it's all just ammunition for you.
Yeah, and if you have a track record, if you know someone that they know or work with someone that they work with, that can be, bring that up, and that could be a good topic of conversation, and that if hopefully there's a good memory of that person has of you, and they may go back and ask, hey, I talked to so and so the other day, how was their work at this organization? So yeah, do research on who's talking to you, and find out as much as you can.
So I'm curious, and this is to any of the three of you, do you have an example that you can share of the most complicated question or problem you've been asked to address in a technical interview? Anyone?
Well, that's a broad question. I mean, sometimes I've been asked, like, sort of what, a question that's pretty common, because you're going to be interviewing people who really love technology, and they'll have a strong opinion about it, and they sort of expect you to have a strong opinion. So one that's sort of stopped me before is, what's your, but although I'm guilty of asking this question to people, like, how do you compare, like, this language versus that language? What do you like about, Perl versus Java, to use some older examples, or like, what's your favorite programming language? How do what do you think about functional programming? So people will expect you to have opinions about that. And I mean, some of the sort of like more complicated questions I've been asked are like about the Java virtual machines garbage collection model, which I don't think is a great question, because that's sort of arcane knowledge that is, I think you can learn on the job. A lot of, I can Google that. I don't think those are sort of bad questions.
So I have a question, I think, that relates to maybe something that Taylor said, but let's say you do get a bad question in an interview. How do you address that? So a question that you think is clearly a bad question.
I mean, honestly, you just do your best to try to answer it. It's not going to be fruitful for you to, argue the merits of it.
Right.
Yeah, don't argue with the interviewer.
I mean, that's not going to go well.
You could ask more questions to clarify, I think. Like, that's something that you shouldn't be afraid to do. Actually, with a lot of the technical questions, if you ask for some more information, they'll give it to you, which is helpful. So you should ask, and then maybe that might help narrow down a bad question into something that you can fruitfully address.
Right.
One of the harder questions that I ever was asked was on a phone screen, actually. And it was with cloud. I'm not sure if people are familiar with what cloud is. But it's with one of the engineers, and he said, design cloud. This is after we were talking for like 2 minutes.
On the phone?
On the phone. Design cloud, right? So, I mean, where do you start, right?
Yeah,
design
that's a
what?
whiteboard question.
Which part of it, right? Which part of cloud? Dig into that really broad, generic question and try to find a specific piece of it that you can solve well, and then see where that leads you. Because you're not just going to sit there and design all of cloud. There's 50 people that have done that for the last 4 years, right? So find a specific piece of it that you can answer.
Yeah, one question I was asked, and this was sort of the focus of the entire interview, was they brought out several sheets of paper and a Monopoly game. It's okay, now you're going to design a software version of Monopoly. Now that's a complicated question, but that leads to a sort of an hour exercise where you're, and I thought that was a great interview. That was a really fun interview, because I just worked out with them doing some application design, and that turned out, I mean, it was really fun, and it led to some problem solving. They could see how I approach things, and so that was sort of a complicated question. It wasn't on a phone screen. It was, that was sort of a whiteboard question in a room where you can spitball, and that can be a really good question.
From your guys' perspective, what is the most difficult type of technical interview? I mean, I know you've talked about phone screen, and you've talked about a session where you whiteboard or where you're given a problem. I mean, what's the one that you dread is maybe not the right word, but what's the one that you like the least?
I would say the thing that I like the least about interviews is just a lot of the time at least in the startup world, it's like there's no like second, third rounds of interviews. It's just like one day you meet with as many people as they can cram in, and it's just an exhausting kind of experience because you show up at 10, 11 o'clock and you're there till 6, and you've talked to like 8 people, sometimes 2 at once, right? So you just kind of have to be prepared for that sort of mental anguish for the day. It can be an exhausting experience.
Raghu, do you have thoughts on that?
Let's see. I think the whiteboard one is probably the least fun for me. I much prefer, nowadays, I see most of the companies, at least around Chicago, the small ones, they just do pair program with somebody at the company for like an hour or two. So like there's no more theory, there's no more guessing what you know. They're sitting with you, you're working on their product, and they see what you can do. I like those the best. I like the whiteboard, the abstract puzzles ones the least.
Okay.
But you should probably be prepared for either.
Yeah, I think the questions I like least are like how many phone books are there in New York, and then that's why is a manhole
What's the answer
cover?
to that one?
Yeah, I have no idea. But why is the manhole cover round? How does the toilet work? How does the toilet flush? I'm like, that's not really germane to. I mean, I've been in interviews where like my partner will ask that question. I'm just like, why? That and the sort of the minutia of like specific programming languages or models, I think is not. Those aren't super useful. But at Orbitz, we went through a period where after work, we would go to the bar next door and just trade. It was like a contest, who could ask the most difficult question in an interview for the people that were coming in. And that was, I don't think that was really healthy in retrospect.
So don't interview.
I've gotten much better.
I'm curious to know if there is advice that you guys have been given about the technical interview that has just turned out to be patently false. Things that people say you really should be prepared for this, and then you have never been in a technical interview where that has ever been asked. It's all true. Everything.
It's not all true every time, but like there's some edge case, some interview somewhere will contain one of those things,
Right.
So. Yeah.
So back to your point then about you guys need to research who you're interviewing with, know the product, know the company. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before I think we open it up for questions, the one last question I'd like each of you to respond to is, and I know this is vague and broad, and I suppose you should think about this more from the perspective of interviewing in general. But if you had one piece of advice to give, or one piece of advice you wish you had been given before you went out to have these technical interviews, what would that be? Taylor, we can start with you.
Sure. I would say focus on the type of job that you want. Like if you want to work for a startup, do as many interviews at startups as you can. Same for any other type of job. And the first time you go interview at a startup, and if you fail and you do terribly, like that's fine, right? All you have to do is be successful one time, right? Get your foot in the door. A lot of time in the startup community, it's a little bit fraternal in the sense that like once you've kind of made it like into the startup world, like you have a little bit behind you. It's sort of easier the next time. People won't poke at you as hard, right? Because they feel like you've been a little bit vetted. So just like keep at it, try not to get discouraged. And there's plenty of interviews that I failed in horribly in, right? And sometimes like if you're switching jobs, like you haven't interviewed for a long time, you're not going to do well. So just kind of keep at it. Like you only have to be successful that one time. And hopefully at the company that you actually want to work for. But yeah.
So I can only usefully offer advice in terms of like really small, early stage startups, because that's where I have most of my experience. So if you're gonna try and join like a seed stage startup where really they might not even have anybody technical yet, and you're the first technical person there, the interviewers are going to be like the co-founders or whatever. They're not going to have any technical questions for you. What they're going to want to see is something that you've built. So you should prepare that. Like have a live app that works so that you could just point them at or something. Show them something that you've done. And if you're going to be one of the early technical people at a startup, you have to demonstrate proficiency with the whole stack from back end to front end. So make some small little app that you built yourself, get it live, create a demo account for them so they don't have to make one, they don't have to sign up. Seed it with some data so they can see, what is there. If you can, put your code up on GitHub. in case they have somebody technical there that you can show your code. Make them a collaborator on your GitHub repo if it's private. Like, get all these things set up ahead of time specifically so you can show them what you can do. For early stage startups, it's key. Like, they can't carry any dead weight. They have to know, they have to see that you can build something real. So have that ready to show.
GitHub is almost like an extension of your resume these
Yeah.
days. Like, people want to see your GitHub. They want to see what you've built. They want to see like what pull requests you've made.
Exactly.
And they like want to see that you have built stuff in the real world.
Yeah, if you can make contributions to open source projects or libraries and have that reflected in your GitHub, like, it's all about GitHub now, basically is what I'm trying to say. Like, shape up your GitHub. That's even more important. For startups, they don't care that much about your resume as much as they do your actual code. So have that shaped up and ready to present.
I'd be honest, first of all. I mean, don't front. That's going to lead to trouble. But ask questions, like I said. I mean, I could give one example. Like, I was interviewing somewhere, and I was asking them about how their architecture, and I was like, well, why did you build that yourself when there's, this was, I think, in the early 2000s. Like, Strut's been around for 2 years, and it's widely available. It does what you are doing. Why wouldn't you use this? I mean, so ask questions and have an opinion, and that it shows some interest and some, problem solving that's applicable to the problems that they have, and that's, that's going to demonstrate value that you can offer to that company, and that's going to be very positive.
Great. So at this point, we'll open it up to your guys' questions because I'm sure you have a lot. Should we pass this mic around, or can everybody be heard? Yeah, we're okay. All right. Anybody got a question? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, you mentioned how you're kind of breaking into the fraternal group is kind of the hard part. I guess a kind of specific question for us who are young, we're still developing our skill set. If we see maybe a position that we're really interested in, but we don't have the skills yet, we're in the process of working on some project or taking a class, when's the right time to communicate with that company? Do I have to wait until I know those things, or should I, email them early and tell them, here's what I'm doing, I'm interested in the company?
I mean, I can't say like 100% for all startups, but I think most startup employers care more about your potential than like whether or not you know Scala or Erlang or those types of things. They just want to know that you're capable of learning them. If you know of a company that you really want to work for and they have open source certain projects, right? Try to work on those, try to contribute to those, because then when you go to apply, you say, hey, like, I've done this already, and like, I'm interested in your product, I know your product. Like, that shows like, a lot of, sort of ambition on your part, and, really, like, that you're really like, interested in what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true not just for startups. I would say, most people are happy, especially for new graduates. Companies are happy to teach you and have you learn on the job. And I don't think it's necessary that you're going to be an expert in whatever language or technology that they're using when you walk in the door. I mean, most companies expect to do some amount of training and have you learn on the job. I think that's fine. So I wouldn't necessarily wait until you're proficient.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that too. I think when a business or a company sees that you're passionate about their product and what they're doing, that just gives you one more entry point, right? And so if you're not ready to apply yet, but you're actively engaging them and saying, hey, I'm really interested, most times, even from my perspective, most times if someone shows an interest, I'm a little bit more willing to take a little bit of extra time and say, hey, well, the people we do hire, these are the things that we really want them to be proficient in. So if you're still moving down that path, maybe you should think about doing X, Y, Z, specifically. Raghu, would that be for the startup anyway? Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. I mean, and also, like, I don't think, at least in Chicago right now, a lot of the company, if you just email them and you're like, hey, can I come pair with you for an hour? A lot of them will be like, sure. And then you learn from them and they get to meet you, and that will serve you well down the road. So I don't think it can be too early to just reach out and see if there's any way to engage.
Right. Was there a question over here? Yes.
Yeah, I wondered if you have any advice for someone like me, where you certainly do a lot of computer programming, things like that, but have very little formal training. Is there anything that I need to learn before doing a technical interview?
I mean, I don't think formal training is sine qua non. It's certainly helpful, and there may be some questions that you won't be able to answer, like if you haven't taken an algorithms class, you might not be able to answer the big O questions. But if you can demonstrate, talk about the programming that you've done and some of the projects that you've worked on, that's going to be just as, if not more important. So I wouldn't let that stop you. I think you just need to be honest about, I don't know that, or I don't, can you ask some questions to help you solve one of those, answer one of those questions. So I wouldn't let that stop you. I mean, to prepare, I think you just need to be prepared to talk about the work that you have done.
Talk about how you've taught yourself X and Y and Z.
Yeah.
I would say if you lack some of the formal training, then things like GitHub, Stack Overflow, anything that can sort of like display your expertise, will be helpful. If you lack formal training, like if there was anything you were going to go back and like do like a Udemy or Code Academy type class on, like data structures, algorithms, like those two.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a great question because we were actually talking about that earlier. In my group in particular, I think there are more humanities degrees than there are computer science degrees. So it's not that you have to have the formal training, but it's, as these guys have said, it's that you have to understand if you're going to interview, who are you interviewing with, what is the position for, what are their expectations of you, and if you are deficient in any of those areas, be prepared to talk about why and what you're willing to do to, sort of come up to speed. Other questions? Yep.
You guys all graduated from UC. Did you find yourself lacking something coming into the job, or first interviews? What were you most efficient in that you wish you'd learned more for your first job?
I'm not qualified to answer this on two fronts. One is that I haven't graduated yet. I have one last credit in me. And the other is that since I graduated, or since I got into this year, I haven't actually, I've been on the interviewing side, like from the interviewer's side of it. So I don't know, like, I mean, you know me, you're in the code, the starter league class,
Yeah.
right? So I needed to build something practical. I took computer science classes here, but they were all about the technical kind of algorithms and data structures and things, whereas I didn't have an app that I'd actually built front to back to show for myself. So that's what, Starter League did for me. So
That's probably the biggest thing. I mean, I don't feel qualified to answer that because I was, I've been working in the industry without a CS degree for, 12 years or so, and decided to come back and fill in some gaps. But I would say experience is the big thing that you're lacking. So if you've do some personal projects and build some things that you can talk about. I mean, when I'm interviewing people, I'm not, if they're fresh out of school, when I'm interviewing people, I want them to talk about their experience and the work that they've done. And the degrees that they have is less important than their work experience. And so for people who don't have work experience, they sort of have to fall back on like, well, tell me about a project you did in class. If you have some other sort of personal project that you've worked on, that's even better. So if you work on some open source or just a personal project that has something that you can talk about, how did you design this and what decisions you made, that's the biggest piece of advice I could get, I think.
So I can answer your question, I think, from when, so I did my undergrad in San Francisco, and I feel like when I graduated from Chicago, I'd already had some work experience, and so I already kind of knew what I was doing, right? When I graduated from my undergrad, I had all this theory knowledge, and I knew like all about Big O and computer science, right? But I didn't know how to build anything, right? And back when I graduated undergrad in 2003, there was no GitHub, and it wasn't as easy to sort of get involved with open source projects. So I had sort of this lack of knowledge of like how to do things in the real world, which now I think is a lot easier to get past. So the more sort of open source projects you can work on and contribute to, that's sort of like the more real world tools you'll be exposed to, and that's what's going to help you.
You know, a follow-up question to your question, actually. So you guys talked about having personal projects, and you talked earlier about, you know, algorithms and data structures. I mean, are there types of projects that you would recommend if people are going to do things on their own? Types of projects that they do, things that they investigate?
I would say just the personal projects that you should work on, open source projects that you want to contribute to, obviously are going to be ones that are similar to the type of job that you want. You know, if you want to do iOS development or Android development, like have a pet project that is like that, right?
Yeah, if you want to do web development, have a web project. You know, if you want to, it depends on the sort of type of work that you want to do, and have it be as closely applicable to that as you can.
If you happen to, if the company you want to work for has an API, build something that involves their API. I mean, just as if you know what you want, just build in that direction.
There was a question over here.
Yeah, I guess this one's specifically for Raghu.
I'm just saying it's difficult to know what you want to do. Like, you know, I can see myself doing web dev, I can see myself doing, you know, building servers somewhere. You know, there's all these things I feel like I could arbitrarily pick one, but that seems like a non-trivial problem.
All the more reason to build personal projects. It helps reveal maybe preferences to some extent. And if you like everything, then I'm happy for you.
All right, you had a question.
Yeah. You said you came back to school because you didn't have a skill set to find the solutions to the problems you were interested in. So what were the problems you were interested in, and then what skills did you find you were lacking?
I started up companies with a completely I was a biochemistry business major at Indiana University. Then I dropped out and started up stuff, so I was totally on the business management side of things. And then it was fine, it was fun, I guess, but not really. I'd much rather build the stuff myself. It's actually very frustrating for me to try and like have an idea and then try and communicate it to developers, find the right developers to build it, and then like it takes 6 months to get like a little idea prototyped. Super frustrating. I just want to be able to sit down and make it and maybe decide that it's like sucks and then go to some other idea instead of investing 6 months of development, something like that. So really just the ability to program at all, I lacked. And so I came back and I took CS classes here, and then turns out it didn't get me that ability to sit down and just kind of prototype things. So then I ended up learning that outside at another educational institution, and that got me to where I am now, so I can actually just build stuff, which is fun.
That's great. Other questions, folks? Yeah, in the back.
What's a good GitHub look like? I mean, most of us are familiar with resumes, but like, what's an employer want to see? What's like a good one?
I mean, if you can find a popular open source project that you have had pull requests accepted through, right, that's a good thing. If you have your own project that you created that other people are actively using in the real world, that has been forked and people are actively contributing back to it, that shows that you've built something that like people in the real world have found useful. So I would say like that is like, if you have an open source project that you have started that other people are contributing to and people are actually using it in the real world, that's like golden.
Yep. That's almost case closed for me.
Yeah, but otherwise I would say, like, you know, having something that you're at least able to demo. I mean, if it's half started and it doesn't work, then that's not going to be obviously as impressive. But like if it's either you can show a working copy of it, or if it's very easy to check out and build, and there's very, you know, simple instructions for how to get it going, that's gonna help. If it's just sort of a mess that nobody, you know, that doesn't build when you check it out, that's not gonna help you.
Right. You guys have mentioned open source a couple times, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on what open source projects would most grab your attention if people had contributed to them. Are there any that sort of come to mind?
I think it depends upon, like at StackMob, we're a company, we build APIs, you know, we have a data store. So I would be interested in people who have worked on any projects related to distributed systems. But it, you know, it depends on, you know, what that company XYZ is doing and what's relevant, really.
Today there's buzzword data science in this design the section of statistics, math, and computer science. And there are a few of us who have background in statistics, but maybe not a lot in computer science. So I'm saying they're looking to get into, let's say, a technical company. Is there any advice that what do people look up for? How does one go about it?
I mean, people are looking for, skills around Hadoop and R. So, I mean, if you can construct some, toy projects or not necessarily toy projects that use those tools, companies are looking for people who have experience in those skill sets. So if you can come in and hit the ground running with those technologies, that'll make you that much more marketable.
Yep.
I have a follow-up to that. Actually, more of like a two-year question, which is, if you're looking to find projects that you can actually work on front to back and like a data science level, places like Catalog.com is a great place to just find do that. You potentially have, other than having a stand open source repository on GitHub, you have actual projects that you can build on front to back to solve the problem. In a data science context, it's the same sort of idea as writing need to have on projects.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody? Yep.
In a lot of more traditional interviews, the piece of advice that people usually get is to send a follow-up email or a thank you note or thank you email. And in technical interviews or more casual interviews, is that still seen as good form or kind of okay?
I mean, I think for any interview, that's a courteous thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a way to get people to remember you, to know that you're actually really interested in it. If you look at it from the perspective of could it do any harm? No. So it could only do good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would agree too. I mean, and I would just follow up on that with saying I don't know that there are many pieces of advice that relate to just traditional interviews that would not also relate to technical interview, because you're still interviewing with people. As Phil said, you don't necessarily know who you're going to be interviewing with, and they may not want to even be in that interview, right? Or they may be the person who is actually making the ultimate hiring decision. So the better foot forward you can put, both from the technical perspective, but also from the soft skills perspective, the better.
Yeah, and I would, people, the traditional interviews, people recommend that you dress well. I would still recommend that. I mean, it's more likely you could get away with dressing down at a technical interview, but it's still, I think, risky. I mean, you to be pretty supremely self-confident and really not need the job to dress like a slob. And I dress like a slob every day, but I would not. Right. I mean, I would not do that.
Well, and I think that goes to all of you guys' points of you should really know who you're interviewing with, right? Do a little bit of research and figure out what is the company like, who are the people that I'm going to be interviewing with, and for me, a rule of thumb would be, dress maybe 25% better than the daily dress code is for the place that you're interviewing,
yeah.
Right? So if it's
not going to be bad to be the best dressed person there.
Yeah, business casual is probably great, but Any other questions? No? Oh, yeah, one in the back.
Yeah, you were saying before how you could maybe email somebody at a company and ask to pair with them. How exactly would you go about doing that, and how would you find who to contact and what to say? I mean, it would seem kind of odd to just troll some company's directory for some random email. So can I pair with you? How would you do that?
That would be a little strange. But hopefully you can, if the company, you can see who the recruiter is, first of all. You can just ask them, just be like, hey, I love this company. I'd love to just come in and pair with one of your guys if anybody has time, and they'll help you. They're desperate for talent, right? So they'll help you connect with somebody. Or you just follow them on Twitter and find some tweet that interests you and tweet at that person, something like that, I think.
One suggestion I could make is if there's a company that you're interested in and they're hosting meetups, go to those meetups even if you don't care about the topic, because those engineers will probably be like right next to where the talk is working. They may have like, if it's 6 or 7 o'clock, they may have stopped and they're drinking, having a beer. Like, just talk to them, That's an easy way to sort of get your foot in the door.
We've got time for one more if anybody has another question they'd like to ask. No? All right, well, I want to thank you guys for coming out, and I want to thank our panelists, Taylor, Raghu, and Phil, for sharing some insight on the technical interview. So, thanks, everybody.